of headhunters, and we'll be talking about the employee value proposition. Okay, so Dr. J, tell us about the employee value proposition. What exactly is the concept and how does it work?
Thank you, Mr. Masie. That's a very interesting subject, and particularly at this time of our business cycles in Zimbabwe. The concept of employee value proposition, there's nothing very special or strange about it, except that it is a concept that says an employer must be able to have some form of a branding position with respect to all the benefits and everything that an employer gives to his staff in exchange for the skills, for the competencies, the time and the effort that the employee puts in the workplace. So it may come in the form of a salary, it can come in the form of direct cash benefits, indirect cash benefits, it can come in the form of a time off kind gestures that the employer can be able to accord to employees. So in a nutshell, we are simply saying it's everything that the employer puts together in order to reward or compensate the time and the skill and competence that the employee gives in producing either a service or producing a physical product. But I referred to it as a branding concept in that normally that value proposition gives an employer some form of a character, a reputation, or it gives the employer the impetus to have the ability to attract and retain talent. So, in other words, we are saying it also gives the employer the position where we can say that they can become an employer of choice, where every other talented employee out there is willing to come and work for you. So primarily we are saying that from an employee's perspective, we are talking of a concept where we are saying, why should I come and work for you? Or from an employer's perspective, we are saying the employer must be answering the question, why should a talented employee come and work for me? So I must then be able to put together a package or a proposition that is so attractive that any talented employee is willing to come and work for us. So it will, in my view and experience, it is composed of both the monetary aspects and the non-monetary aspects that an employer can be able to accord in exchange for talent in short. I hope I've answered you.
Perhaps further to that, what's your idea on the employee value proposition in relation to this COVID era that we're going through? And further to that, also in relation to the hyperinflationary environment, how do you think that would play out?
You have brought in two important factors that, particularly in Zimbabwe, have significantly affected business, not only in Zimbabwe but even globally. Particularly the aspect of COVID has brought about some serious disruption in the manner and way in which businesses are run. So I'm going to tackle your question in two parts. I will refer to the COVID issues, its implication on the employee value proposition, and secondly, I'm going to look at the inflationary pressures and see how they impact on the employee value proposition. So starting with reverting back to the issue of COVID, when you look at COVID, like I said earlier on, that it has got a disruptive effect. All of a sudden, we woke up in a scenario where our employees or staff had to work remotely from work. There were issues to do with social distancing, where possibly you were believed in pool offices you could not be able to have people in the same pool, you could not ferry people on the same bus, you could not gather employees, we could not have face-to-face meetings, you could not meet with clients and so on, and it became very risky. But it was an eye-opener to most employers. In that, in my view, over the years, there has been talk and concepts that talk about really changing the way in which businesses are run and the way we work. And when we talk about changing the way we work, primarily what we are saying is that we are migrating from the traditional contract of employment where an employee is contracted permanently 8 hours a day to a particular employer. And we are migrating to what we can possibly call flexible employment arrangements. And flexible employment arrangements are those arrangements where possibly an employer or an employee can actually be able to adopt a variety of ways of working which are different from the traditional setup where you come and work 8 to 5. When I say you are adopting a variety of these would include things like really home working, which you are talking about, and quite a number of employers now could have actually realized that there is quite a significant portion of the workforce that has been coming to the offices when in actual essence they are not supposed to be coming to the offices, and they could actually cut rentals and reduce the space that they've always occupied and be able to have somebody working from the comfort of their own home, and also creating the ability to actually achieve cost effectiveness in the conditions of service or in the employee value proposition. It will create an advantage to both parties. The employee, they could be paid less than what they were paid for, but that particular money could actually have much more value because now they are no longer spending time on the roads looking for fuel, transport costs, etc. All those ones can be totally cut out, and the employer can benefit and the employee can benefit, or they can actually be added on the employee, and the value of the employee goes up without necessarily increasing the cost to the employer. So you are using exactly the same money to create much more value. So insofar as COVID, in my view, affected and disrupted a lot of other things, but it gave us the opportunity to look at business differently. And now that we are looking at business differently, we are saying that the same amount of money that we were giving to our employees before can now be able to do more if our employees, say, are working from home or they are working differently from the way that they have always worked. So yes, there is the downside on the social side, but there is the upside on the economic side from an employee value proposition point of view, and the employer can actually be able to do much more for the employees. And employees, of course, the other side, people have also argued, the other people, researchers have argued to say employees are less productive when they are at home than they are at work. It's a downside to it. It requires research into it to find out and verify whether there is actually merit in that particular argument. So in my view, it's an area that still demands a bit of some research and a bit of some testing and adapting to see whether we are moving in the right direction. But primarily, one thing that I have seen that will work is that we just have got to migrate to flexible labor arrangements where eventually employers will have to introduce flexible pay systems, variable pay systems, coupled with fixed pay arrangements, and also flexible working arrangements, and then be able to pay for actual real time worked rather than paying for a month of presence at a particular physical place. And in my view, if we move in that direction, we are going to work. Then let me also tackle your second part when you then talked about issues of hyperinflation and inflation on employee value proposition. The issue of inflation in essence is very simple. It erodes the buying power of whatever that you are giving to your employees, and they will not be able to buy what they were able to buy by the same amount that you paid them last month in the following month. And in that happening, then what it means is that the employer has got to then keep his finger on the pulse, or must always be checking that the value of the employee is not being eroded over time. And when they look at the value of the employee not being eroded all the time, one of the methodologies that I have seen in practice to working include number one, indexing your employee salaries to US dollars, so that you know that this particular employee is going to be earning $1,000 US consistently. And therefore, every other month, we make sure that we will pay the local currency or the RTGS currency that is equivalent to $1,000 US dollars. But this also assumes that the revenue being generated from your sales is able to quickly respond to changes in the inflationary environment. Because if that doesn't happen, you are likely going to end up with a wage bill that you cannot be able to carry, or that you cannot be able to sustain. So now, sometimes reality on the ground doesn't work out that way, that your revenues and your prices will change as quickly as the inflation has changed. You may find yourself lagging behind a bit, and then you have got your salaries creeping up, and you consume all the revenue, and then you end up with an unsustainable business. So what do you have to do? The way to run around that is where you then find that employers are now beginning to then do a combination of indexing a certain part of the $1,000 to US dollars, and the other part it remains in what? In the local currency. In that way, it creates a win-win situation between the employer and the employee, and then the business is able to sustain itself into the long term. Beyond that, it's also trying to use what I call guerrilla compensation tactics. This is where the guys who understand the war would really come up. What you need to do by guerrilla compensation tactics is similarly a scenario where you then say, okay, what is the best line that can be able to create a meaningful life for an employee with a family, say of a size of 6 people, the 2 spouses, and maybe a maximum of 3 children. What is it that can sustain them? Then you set that as a base, and you then say, okay, for them to live a decent life, they need $300 to $400. And that's the amount that you then say, consistently, we will pay it and pay our salaries at that. And when you pay your salaries and conditions of service or employee value proposition and that, the next thing that you then have to do is then where I'm bringing the guerrilla compensation tactics is where you then say, depending on availability of cash flows, then you may have to run away from running a payroll once a month, or you may physically run a payroll once a month, but you may want to then introduce, say, weekly or fortnightly allowances that you can actually be able to give your employees to cushion them against changes that are happening on a weekly basis. And at the same time, you are responding to the performance of the business at that particular point in time. And then you are able to create an equilibrium that makes your employees happy, and that gives you the ability to attract and retain talent. At the same time, your business is also responding to the performance in the market in terms of your sales volumes that you can actually be chasing. So if you look at that, I would think if employers use those kind of arrangements, of course it creates a bit of some additional activity in terms of the salaries and conditions of service administration side on the employee benefit side. It may create a bit of some more activity than before, but at the end of the day, the benefits are greater than not doing anything at all. I hope I've addressed.
And I think now it makes me wonder, do you think the total pay concept works in a country such as ours? Does the total pay concept work in Zimbabwe? If it does work in Zimbabwe, who does it benefit more than? Does it benefit the employer? Does it benefit the employee? How does that play?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. The concept of total cost to employer or total pay, the concept in terms of its history and development holds that the employer would want to give you a specific figure per month and then say this is the total cost for hiring a particular talented employer. And then the employer is trying to run away from giving money names or allowances where they say, yes, we'll pay you school fees for your children, we'll pay for your holiday allowance, we'll pay for your housing allowance, we'll pay for transport allowance, and then the list becomes endless. So employers are trying to, the concept of total cost to employer was trying to create two primary things. Number one is creating what we call a clean payroll. And a clean payroll simply says, Joe so much is employed in this organization and his total cost of employment is XY dollars. And then you pay them that. He then goes and decides what to do with that money for himself. If he wants to go and invest in buying a motor vehicle or pay school fees or go for a holiday or pay for medical aid or medical insurance or whatever that he wants to pay for, it's up to his or her own personal discretion, and the employer is not involved in deciding for people. So that's generally the concept. So you have created a clean payroll on one side. Number two, apart from the clean payroll, it has got the rationale that in the event of fluctuations in prices of certain activities in the market, the risk of those changes in prices, if it is a change going upwards, it is not likely going to affect the employer for such a period up to the day they have agreed that they will then review that particular benefit or part of that employee value proposition. So for example, let me take a scenario. If we had agreed that total cost to employer is $100 per month, and in that $100 there is a basic salary, there is medical insurance, there is housing allowance, there is transport allowance. And in the event that we agreed that we will only revisit and review that after 6 months, then the employer can be able to predict his or her cost of labor for those 6 months, to say to the last cent, to say this is what it is. And if it so happens that over this period, some of the variables that would have been considered or included in the computation of the total cost to employer changes, and for example your medical insurance goes up by another $5 or so, the employer is not going to carry that cost. It will remain the employee's cost. So there is a bit of some risk on the part of the employee. But conversely, assuming for whatever reason the price of a particular aspect comes down, then the employee actually what? Benefits. So it's a 50-50. Everybody is may benefit here and there. But of course, in the context of a hyperinflationary environment, or where inflation goes up, we do not expect prices to come down. So they are likely going to be going up consistently time and again. And if that so happens, the challenge is that the total cost to employer technically will then not work, because it then exposes the employees to the changes that are happening in the environment. And sometimes you may then have to frequently be changing those conditions of services in such a time that you are able to respond in time. Then you may be able to maintain. So my answer could be yes and no. And why is it a yes and no? It is a yes if you want to maintain the concept and you are then in a position to then agree on a much shorter practical time to relook at the components that make your total cost to income. And my suggestion under the current circumstance is that currently you may want to look at it on a monthly basis, or on the extreme end you may want to look at it on a quarterly basis. So you agreeing on anything beyond a quarter is going to be exposing the employee to the fluctuations and changes in prices, and they can have significant erosion in the value that are supposed to be coming to them. So employers are supposed to be tracking the movements on a monthly basis or on a quarterly basis, and then they can be able to review to make sure that they are in line with the changes that are happening in the general economic and inflationary changes that are happening in the country. And if that happens, then you can continue to then use your total cost to employer concept. But if you don't do that, then the answer is it will not work. And if it doesn't work, you then suffer brain drain, you lose all the important skills and competencies, and they'll be taken by competitors, and they'll be taken by those organizations that are able to make sure that they remain competitive, and they are able to offer conditions of services or value to the employee that is worth their effort, their skill. And remember, like I said at the beginning, that it's more of a transactional relationship where somebody has got the skill, the time, competencies, and the knowledge to be able to come and discharge in the workplace in exchange for value. So everybody just wants value, and that value is going to be protected, and it must be put in place, and it is the responsibility of the employers. So we are possibly, to sum it up, we are possibly moving into the era where we are talking of what we call precarious employment, precarious pay. Why? Because it's not so certain, and it cannot be certain for the employer, it's not so certain for the employee, but we have got to continue behaving like a boxer, and then jumping around the ring, and where we can get a hook, then maybe, who knows, we can be able to win. So what we are saying is, consistently we want to create the durability or the value of what we are offering to our employees at a certain level, and make sure that it's not ridiculously low, and we employ methodologies that adopt both flexible labor arrangements and flexible pay arrangements. That's probably how I would start.
Borrowing from the example that you gave, I think we got knockout advice this afternoon. So there you have it. This has been Hhi Business interviewing Dr. Andrew Jimenez on our channel, the HA.